Welcome everyone to today's webinar and into the journey with Bernard Coard in conversation with Neita. My name is Chanel and my colleague here.
I'm Leigh. I'm one of the solicitor apprentices at Leigh, and I'm sure everyone's looking forward to the discussions that unfold. So before we start, we're going to have a short conversation with me and Chanel just about our thoughts on the book and so on.
So, Malik, what's your ethnic background?
My background is West Indian and I'm Jamaican.
So you're Jamaican. Sweet.
What about you?
Same West Indian background. My mum was born and raised in Barbados, and my dad was born here, but raised back home in Guyana, and his mum is from Trinidad. And so based off from that, you know, we've been reading this book for a while now. And I just want to know, what was your experience like in the British school system as a young Black British boy of West Indian heritage? What was that like for you? Good
question. I feel like this book definitely encapsulates the experience of a young British student from West Indian backgrounds. My experience, there were different things that happened. I feel like one of the quotes in this book perfectly explains it. The Black child's true identity is denied daily in the classroom. So I feel like when it comes to identity, the things that we are taught in school, our culture, I feel like the school system failed to suit our needs in that sense. For example, an experience when I joined a school in Kent towards the south of England, me and my mum had an introduction to the school about ahead of year. And upon deciding what set I would be and stream, she pointed out that I would start off in the lower sets and the lower streams so I can work my way up apparently. And my mum heard that and she laughed. I looked at her and said, "Oh, why are you laughing, mum?" And her response was, "She must be mad." So she gave the head teacher my report, and then she said, "Oh, I must have been mistaken. Malik will begin in the upper sets." So I never understood why that was an experience or what that meant. But the older I got, I realized that that's how the school system was, and it's up to the parents, the system, and so on to change that. So what were your experiences, Chanel?
Similar, and I think the book, as you said, it really encapsulates that too. At one point when I was reading the book, it touched on the cultural differences and the fact that there is a cultural bias, a racial bias even. And I felt for myself, culturally, you know, we're both born and raised here, but for my other pupils in the class who were possibly were born back home and came over here, you could see how that the difference between us and those who were born back home and came into the classroom, how that was like for them as well, and how they would automatically assume that we didn't understand what was going on, or we were less intelligent based upon the accent or the colloquialism. So the colloquial language that we have amongst ourselves, like, you know, how we talk amongst ourselves, like this, like that. But and so often we'd break into patois amongst ourselves and just speak in our own tongue amongst ourselves. But they always assume that we didn't understand what was going on. And in fact, I think the most intelligent people that I have surrounded myself around have been brought up and schooled back home. And I remember my dad being very hard on us when we were learning and how we were taught. And he'd often complain about the school system here and how he didn't think it was as advanced as that back home. And he thought that, you know, what we were learning at one stage, we should have been learning quite a few years ago, and that's not how it was back home. So it was quite interesting that that was a view that was taken. You know, you mentioned how they were going to put you in a different set and your mum had to put them back in their place essentially. And it could be something like that. I think for me, I remember saying that I wanted to, before I wanted to go into law, I actually wanted to study medicine. And I remember at the careers fair, they were saying, "Oh, people like you can't go into that kind of area. I think you need to try, you know, more of the BTEC options or something else." So that was our experiences really, just put down a lot, marked off as ill-mannered, uneducated children. Yeah. Well, Based off on that, thank you, Malik. And without much further ado, I'd like to introduce Frances Swain. She is our former managing partner here at Leigh and now consultant solicitor working in the Human Rights Department. So on to you, Fran.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chanel and Malik, for your recollections and thoughts for today, which are a very good introduction to how the current school system still is. I'm delighted now to introduce our guest for the evening, Bernard Coard, whose deep interest in education led to his review of how Black Caribbean children throughout the British school system were systematically profiled for educational underachievement, culminating for those most unlucky in the dumping ground of educational subnormal schools. A man of hope, his question has always been, what is possible? And we welcome him today to discuss this in our interview. Our interviewer, well known to many in our audience also, as to Bernard himself, is Dave Neita, lawyer, poet and educator, working within the primary, secondary and tertiary education sectors here and abroad, and with a lifelong commitment to facilitating students to reach their best potential. So I'm going to hand over now to Dave and to Bernard for our event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fran, and thank you, Chanel and Malik, for your all your introductions and for setting the stage for this evening's event, which we're very fortunate to have this connection with Bernard, who is all the way in Jamaica and connecting with us tonight. We hope to have a very discursive and also productive conversation about Bernard's book. Before I even ask the first question of Bernard, I'll just say that Bernard is regarded as a consummate educator. He's described, and I'll quote, he's described as, and this is a direct quote, Bernard was, is, and will always be an educator. And that's a direct quote from the former leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn. And I think Jeremy echoes the sentiments of lots of us in this country and globally, if we have experienced Bernard and his interaction and contributions to education here in Britain and abroad. His book, was written 50 years ago. And when the book was first written, it was greeted with criticism from the government and labeled as an outright misstatements. And that moved from that position to saying, well, it has some credibility. Eventually moved to the position of saying it has absolute credibility. And it is now recommended reading for all teachers in the UK, the Caribbean, and the globe, because it's such a seminal and important work. The name of the book is How the West Indian Child is Made Educationally Subnormal in the British School System. And I'll just hold up my own copy here so you can see the title of the book. My first three questions, Bernard, and welcome, and you'll have your own opening statement, but my first three questions are based on the title of the book. The first question is really the word is in the title. How the West Indian Child is. When this was written 50 years ago, Bernard, that word was used because that was what's happening. It would be everybody's hope that looking back 50 years, the book would have to be retitled, How the West Indian Child Was Made Educationally Subnormal in the British School System. But anybody working in education right now will agree that that word is still relevant. The word is. I invite your comments on that, Bernard, how you might be feeling now, given you wrote that book 50 years ago, and the title can still remain and still be relevant to this day.
Well, thank you, for your introduction. Let me say that I think first to understand that, we need to understand that first and foremost, we're dealing with a systemic problem. We're dealing with a system that had no intention of educating its own white working class, which is why it had schools for the upper class since the Middle Ages. But universal secondary education for the white working class of Britain, which is the majority of the people of Britain, universal secondary education began with the passing of the Education Act in 1944, in the last year of the Second War, and began to take effect from 1945. In other words, what are we talking about? 75 years? 76 years? In other words, in historical terms, a very short period of time for the majority of Britain's indigenous population. So that tells you something, that first and foremost, you have a system of what I call three supremacies: upper class supremacy, class supremacy, in other words, race supremacy, and gender supremacy. It is upper class centric and dominated and controlled. It is white supremacist in its ethos, its systems, in its functioning, and it is male centric. The male supremacy has been diluted to some degree through the struggles of the suffragettes in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. In more recent times, recent decades, the feminist movement, the Me Too movement, and so on. But still, we know of the many glass ceilings that women face in the system. But most of all, you have class and race. And something that lasts hundreds of years means that it has gone through dozens of generations of people and it's still functioning. And the system is structured to produce failure. It is rigged for failure. Let's be clear. It is rigged for failure by the majority, white and black, the majority. It is rigged for failure. And that is why the word is still relevant and hasn't become was, much as we would all like that to be the case.
Thank you, Bernard. And in a related question, going back to the title, How the West Indian Child is Made Educationally Subnormal in the British school system. Implicit in that, are you also saying that it is by the British educational system? I mean, you alluded to it in your first response, but I'm focusing on that word now. In, yes, there were in, but is it also by the system?
Yes, actually, that's a very important point you're making, that in seeks to capture both in and by, but it's not clear that you're making the point about by is important, especially in response to my first point about the fact that the system has been set up that is rigged for the failure of the majority, and that it is rigged so that it only advances education in keeping with the needs of those who benefit the most from the economy. So that as the country becomes more sophisticatedly industrialized, they needed the working class to be able to read science in factories. They needed basically so they set up secondary moderns for the majority of white working class. The fact is that they stated in their documents that for ESN schools, we are trying to train the children to be docile, disciplined, low-skilled workers for the rest of their lives. There's statements to that effect, not the exact words, but statements to that effect in documents of the people who make decisions back at the time of the second and post-Second World War and coming down. So we have to be clear that even in their internal documents, they are very clear about what they're doing. They're carrying the education system only so far as the number of people they need to fill certain positions in order for them to make profits at the top. That's unfortunately the system that has been constructed. So it's both in and by.
And thank you, Bernard. You're ahead of me at every step. It's a hard interview to do because you're anticipating even the very next question. I'm coming back to the title of the book. How the West Indian child is made educationally subnormal by the British school system. And I now want to focus, my final question on the title itself, I want to focus on educationally subnormal.
Yes.
My understanding is that the education system at the time declared that these students were subnormal, therefore they needed a particular type of education. That was their position. These students are subnormal, therefore they need a particular type of education. But it's clear that from your book that what really happened was that students, all who have the ability to learn and develop and contribute, were given a subnormal education delivered by an education system. In other words, with the capability of delivering a useful education system to everybody, they, let's call it, dumbed down or reduced or degraded the quality of education, packaged that up and gave an inferior gift, if you can even call it a gift, but delivered something inferior to students that were quite capable of contributing to society. And I'll just add that we now are in touch with people who went through that system, who have gone on to study at the highest level and make great contribution to the society, writing books, doing all sorts of productive things in society. I just want to ask a final question on the title itself. Are you alluding to that fact that the British educational system literally packaged something that was inferior to deliver to students that were quite capable of achieving their highest potential?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, I don't want to call names because I don't want to embarrass anybody. But there's one individual who is now a world-famous academic, leading a world-famous university on this globe, whose father was called in by the headmaster of a particular school in London and told, the best thing for your son is to become a carpenter. Now, nothing wrong with being a carpenter. Jesus Christ, his father was a carpenter, but you understand what I'm saying in terms of the expectations and the career and given the sort of salaries and potential in the society that unfortunately carpenters get, you know, and the father went and bought a set of tools for him, brought it home. Now, this guy is one of the most famous people in his field and is globally recognized today. So you have that type of situation. Now, let me put it this way. Caribbean people of the Windrush generation, as it's so-called, came to Britain, were invited to Britain. We must remember that. Were invited to Britain, were advertised to come to Britain in order to help rebuild the country that was devastated by the Second World War with Hitler. What they got were the jobs in factories, mostly manual and semi-skilled, and some skilled jobs in factories, driving the trains, the buses, and working in the hospitals. Now, most of these folks did not come with high certification, but they had great ambition for their children. This is something that you have in the culture in the Caribbean.
Yes.
You may not have made much because of circumstances that you had no control over, but you want your children to do well. Think of the number of Caribbean people I know personally whose parents never made it inside a secondary school for one day, but whose children all have university degrees, some have PhDs, because that is the culture of the West Indies. So they may have come to Britain to work, and the jobs they got were mostly on the lower end of the salary scale and the lower prestige jobs of the society. However, they had ambitions for their children. Now, here's the problem for the establishment. If you bring people to do your most menial and your most low-paying jobs, that's what immigrants all over the world tend to be targeted for when there's a labor shortage within a system.
Yes.
You don't want their children to become doctors and lawyers and engineers and economists and architects and so on, because who's going to do those jobs at the bottom? They were brought to do the jobs at the bottom. And when they reach retirement age, who's going to take over? So that there's a bias in the system, how it's set up, to ensure that there is continuity from one generation to the next, intergenerational continuity in the supply of cheap labor, cheap and relatively unskilled and semi-skilled labor. So we have to bear that systemic dimension of the situation. Now, let's put that to one side and add another dimension. I mentioned white supremacy. Let's be clear on something. You can't have, and this is the point now that we must see it in a dispassionate way. We must examine it as we examine something as a scientist, not with emotion. Ask yourself, if any ethnic group in one region of the world comes because of its military superiority, remember, the parts of the world that it conquered were more advanced in metallurgy, they were more advanced in stonework, they were more advanced in cloth work, they were more advanced in a wide range of technologies and sciences of that day. But what they did not have was the military technology superiority. In fact, I think it was a famous professor at Yale, who's British actually, who wrote a book, The Rise and Fall of Nations. Kennedy is his name. And in that, he talked about the fact that historians have asked, well, why did Europe at a particular historical moment become militarily superior when it wasn't in other respects? And his thesis was that because the Europeans were fighting with each other all the time, Spain, Italy, the different provinces of Germany, the different provinces in Italy, it wasn't a united country then, Britain, France, and so on. There were all these wars, including, you remember from your history, the 30 Years' War in Germany, 1618 to 1648. That's way back as that, and ones before. There's the War of the Roses in Britain, which ended in 1485. It was a 30-year war. Done. That's how Henry VII finally got the throne. So my point is, there are constant wars between the nations and within the nations, and they're developing skills. The Chinese invented gunpowder, and they use it for, what do you call it? Fireworks.
Fireworks.
Display. The Europeans used it as gunpowder to actually have cannons, to where the king was able to get mastery over the feudal lords. That's what moved him from being primus inter pares, first among equals, to being top dog, because he had gunpowder, he had cannons, they didn't. They had swords and lances. So the fact of the matter is that the narrowly military superiority meant that one ethnic group from one region of the world conquered the rest of the world, conquered almost all of Africa, all of North America and South America, Australia, New Zealand, Asia, the Indian subcontinent, everywhere. And as a result of that, when one ethnic group conquers and enslaves millions of people, put them in chains, whip them, cut off their hands, do all sorts of things to them, take them to another part of the world as slaves. And not only are they slaves like old-time slavery you had in Greece, you had in Rome and so on, but in this new form of slavery, their children are also slaves, and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. Everyone in that is born into slavery. That's what makes it different from ancient slavery. Here's my point. With that level of brutalization, with the genocide that was committed in Central and Southern Africa, that was committed in Australia, that was committed in North America, right? Genocide, millions of people wiped out of the indigenous people that were found. With genocide, with slavery, with brutalization, with mass murder, with all of that happening, you have to find a way to justify it, especially as you profess to be Christians. And by the way, the people genuinely believe themselves to be Christians. I mean, let's be clear on that. When the Pope issued an edict back in the Middle Ages, which he sent a message to be read out in every church throughout Europe, that said that the king or the prince of this country can no longer, nothing can be imported or exported from this country. It is completely shut down. That makes American economic sanctions against Cuba and Iran look like a joke in comparison. Frederick II, Barbarossa, the Pope issued an edict for his part of Russia, of Germany, I think it was Prussia at the time. And as a result, the economy collapsed. The people began to be in serious trouble because when they read out an edict that says nothing but the Pope has ordered, the Pope had no troops, but he could order. And because people believed in God and they believed in the hereafter and they believed in heaven and hell, there was genuine belief in that kind of thing. It meant that such an order from the Pope had real effect, more so than an army surrounding and saying nothing comes in, nothing goes out. No, Barbarossa had to go, leave his Prussia and go to the Vatican and kneel down in the snow for months and beg the Pope to lift the interdict. Now, why do I give that example? Because it's the same people who are so deeply religious, who are enslaving and brutalizing and decimating people around the world. They have to, therefore, psychologists should tell you, if your behavior pattern is in conflict with your ideology, your outlook, you have to change your outlook. You either change your outlook or you change your behavior. One has to change, otherwise you go crazy. You'll become mentally ill. You start drinking a lot of rum, you start taking drugs, and you become
cognitive dissonance. It will be cognitive dissonance in that sense.
Exactly. So they came up with a position. Black people and are inferior. They are subhuman. Notice we talk about subnormal schools.
To justify their behavior.
Normal children, and you're talking about black and brown people are subnormal. They are not humans, they are subhuman. Therefore, not brutalizing human beings. We're not violating Christ's message. We're not violating Christian principles. So this is a very important understanding that, in other words, the ideology of racial superiority began there. And throughout the 19th century, the Enlightenment, so-called, you had, of course, so-called scientists who were engaged in all sorts of scientific discoveries to prove the inferiority of black people. They even had some of them in cages on display in Britain and France. Right. Then you had Jensen and these people coming up with theories and devising IQ tests that said that whites were superior to blacks, right? And things like that. And they're the equivalent,
eugenics and all of that.
Bell curve and so on. So the fact of the matter is that people at all levels, including scientists, including the forerunners, the big names in educational psychology, were in fact practicing folk science, right? Fake science, calling it science and using it to decide who goes where in the education system. And that's based on the inherent inferiority. Now, when white teachers, even the best of them, even those who genuinely would say, I'm not racist. I don't think in a racist way. I have no animus towards black people. And they genuinely believe that, right? Yet they find themselves subconsciously believing that the kids won't be able to do as well. That through their assessment of the black kids and their placement, there's enough research in Britain that establishes this. Absolutely. But it's important. We must not demonize these teachers. We must not condemn them. That's not productive. What we have to understand, the mechanism that creates a society, how would it be reasonable if an entire people from one region conquers the rest of the world in the most brutal way, justifies it by saying people are inferior, and then we are surprised when this becomes generationally, it's a transmission. I like to call that social genetics, to distinguish it from biological genetics. And the socialization process is what we're doing. All right. So we have to understand that this is at work and that it is no accident, the choice of language. Now, I know that subnormal schools started before Black kids went up to Britain. They had them for white working class too, but that's why I told you the white working class have also been rigged for failure by the system for hundreds of years. We must never forget. And so the system is geared to satisfy a few at the top from the beginning, from way back.
Yes.
And so it's just that Blacks are now a subcategory to be treated even worse. But the majority of the children is as a whole, and that is why you had all these secondary modern schools, and you had the grammar schools, and then you had the so-called public schools, which were the most private you could think of, and very expensive. So you had a system that was class structured and race structured, right? And that is what we have to understand in order to understand in the system and by the system and for the system and for the system. One final point.
Yes.
A system maintains itself for hundreds of years, not only because the socialization process of each generation reinforces the belief system of the previous generation. That, of course, is fundamental. But in addition to that, there are always people within an exploitative system that benefits from it. Benefits in state, benefits in prestige, benefits in income, benefits in profits, benefits in the exercise of political power. In other words, we must be clear that there are people who want to maintain the system. Why do you think you have some of the media that, in fact, is openly racist? They don't even try to hide it. Because, and they get more sales from doing that. But they're also reinforcing negative tendencies among people that would disappear if there was a contrary socialization process taking place. But they reinforce it and they make profits out of it. They make a lot of money out of it. In other words, there are people who benefit from keeping a system where housing is segregated, where certain people get jobs and others don't, where promotion is determined in a certain way, and so on. There are people who benefit from maintaining the system. That, combined with a socialization process which is almost unconscious. It is a constant unflowing of reality. And that combination creates the perfect conditions for an education system which does the same.
Yes.
Sorry for that answer.
Bernard, it's comprehensive. You took us from a very wide historical perspective and narrowed it into what I could quote one of your quotes in previous discussions. You actually said that the school system here is programmed for failure for the majority. And so we, the beneficiaries listening on this program, having had the context, the historical context that you talked about there now, and I think what you're saying and you're concluding on is that racism and classism and sexism, to point to your 3 points, is profitable for the few, right? At the expense of the many. And I just want to come to the point of an alternative kind of education on the West Indian child. Now, the West Indian child, of which I call myself one of them, growing up in the Caribbean, has a particular experience in the Caribbean in a particular period, a period of Black leadership within the Caribbean. That particular period where your teachers were Black, the majority of teachers and your school leadership were Black. In that system, all children, I know that I was educated in the West Indian regime. And I spent my time knowing full well that I was looked upon with love from my teachers and with a level of high expectation and wanting the best for me, making the most of my potential in that system. That is a system where you can thrive. It's a system where you can look around and go to school with somebody who comes from the lowest echelon in terms of economics and social class and everything, and that can be turned around in a matter of years in terms of the meritocracy and schooling and so on that can transform your social existence and your family. However, that look that you have of love from your teacher, the teacher want the best for you, was not experienced here. And I think you might be arguing when you say go easy on white teachers, that they may not even be capable of demonstrating love because it is not how if teachers are teachers because they have learned and all they have learned is racism, and they may yet be nice, considerate, generous, helpful, but the breeding of racism and classism within the system does not allow a teacher to look upon a Black child in a favorable way, all right? And some of them are just outright racist and want to be so. Some of them would declare they don't want to be so, but are programmed so. As you say, the system is programmed in a way, and a program follows its instructions. When you program a computer, it does exactly what it tells you to do. So when individuals are programmed in a society, they carry out the coder, the wishes and instructions of the coder. And in your view, the coder would be the white supremacist, the male, and the person, the upper class. So given that, we know that performance can be improved with how a child is looked upon and the level of expectation one has for a child. I just want to ask you, what has changed in the last 50 years and how do you see us going forward in terms of delivering this that you get in the West, that you probably get in the West Indies and other Black nations, right? But you're not going to get here naturally. It's just not going to happen, except through perhaps Saturday supplementary education and so on. How do you see us actually putting in that vital ingredient of beautiful, I wouldn't even say high expectations, you know, because that can be misleading. Just wonderful and expansive and appropriate expectations for youngsters. That's the question.
Right. That's crucial. I'm telling you, the more and more I think about this thing, and the more studies I examine, and the more I reflect on my experiences, the more I come to the position that the two most important things for transforming children's educational and life prospects are to reach the parents and to do certain things with the parents. I'll come to that in a while. And the issue of teacher expectation. And if we can't get it in the state schools, we have to provide it through alternative and supplementary education. I'll come to that too in a while. So teacher expectations, we've been talking about that for 50 years. We've been talking about that. I spoke about the Rosenthal and Jacobson study. I must tell you the background to this. This is important. When I was a child at school in Grenada, and I know this is true in all the Caribbean islands that were former British colonies, there are negative aspects of it. So for example, the positive is that everybody got educated. In my time, there were no private schools in Grenada. So the children from the richest families came to school with children that had patches, 40 patches in their khaki pants and no shoes, barefoot, and ate a mango as their breakfast that they stole from somebody's yard on the way to school. It was everybody in the same class. Now, what is interesting is that the teachers, and this is the negative part, the teachers beat not only for misbehavior, back in those days, corporal punishment, not just for misbehavior, but for getting the wrong answer in English, in maths, in whatever the subject was. That's negative. But here's the interesting point. Every single child in the class got the same licks. If they failed to answer the question, there was no question of some children are slow learners, some are this, some are that, some are subnormal. Everybody getting the licks. When they say 9 tables and you can't tell them what the answer is, licks, whoever you are. In other words, in a perverted sort of way, because I do not recommend corporal punishment, obviously. But what is happening there is that the teachers, the system insists that everybody must perform. Everybody must learn the maths. Everybody must learn the English, the history, the geography, the whatever, the whatever. So I grew up in a system of high expectations from all the teachers, from head teacher. Negative aspects of it, I've already pointed out the extremely negative aspects of it. But the expectations were high. So I come to England and I'm trying to pay my school fees, you know. I'm just trying to pay my school fees. I come to study development economics. I didn't come to be anybody in the field of education. That's a story we'll come to in social capital, that we must, when we try to mobilize the community to transform education, let's not just look for people who are teachers now or who are training to be teachers. Take them from wherever. There could be accountants, there could be bankers, there could be great footballers, there could be track and field, there could be entertainers, there could be engineers. I don't care what they do. Once they have certain skills and a certain passion, you recruit them to transform our kids' potential and our situation. So I just sidetracked on that. The important point is I end up in the schools, and from my first day in the school, I'm told, you know, these kids are not very bright. I'm given the full course, the full treatment as to what to expect. I'm given the dumbing down educational expectations treatment for all the children, white working class as well as black, in the school. There were no middle class kids in that school and no upper class in either of the schools that I taught. No. I couldn't accept that because I come from a tradition with it. Education subnormal. What is that? What is that?
Nonsense.
Are we backwards now as part of the curriculum? This is nonsense. So as a result, I was a rebel without intending to be. I said, I'm not dealing with this foolishness. I'm not going to spend the whole year on book 1. I want them to read book 1 and book 2, finish in the first term. By the time we reach the end of the year, they must be on book 6 or 7. In other words,
what was your norm in the West Indian? What was your norm in the West Indies? Was a rebel here?
Yes. In other words, right. In other words, the opposite of what was the norm in the Caribbean was going on here. I didn't accept it. It was not part of my frame of reference. It wasn't part of my experience growing up. I taught in America, it's true, at sort of summer school of the university. So that's another level. But still, everybody was expected to perform in America.
Yes.
Because you have the melting pot culture. I know that a lot of it is not as it made out to be, but there's an element of that in the ideology of America. And so the important point is, therefore, that I violated the instructions I got about how I must teach the kids and how much they can learn.
By doing the right thing, though. By doing the right thing.
Yes, by doing the right thing. And they were racing ahead in all the different areas. Obviously, I had to find a way to hook them because the boys didn't want to learn to read or write, but they want to talk about and read about football, Bobby Moore, Bobby Charlton, Jack Charlton. We're crazy about football. So you get books about the history of the FA, how it was formed, the history of West Ham United, the history of this place and that place, and so on. So in other words, you learn geography because all the countries in the world are playing football. So the world, you come from everywhere. You can study the continents, you can study the countries, you can study history, you can study geography, you can study English, you can study essay writing. There's nothing you cannot study through football. The girls were crazy about it. So you can teach all of fashion. You study the fashion of the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th century, and so on. And the football field, you can measure it. You can do arithmetic and geometry with football fields.
The mathematical game.
Yes, you can teach maths from the fashion. You have to cut the cloth. You have to shape the cloth, and so on. All I'm saying is, therefore, that I refused to follow the thing because nothing special about me, nothing about my training. It was just my upbringing that was I was rebelling. I was revolted by the idea of
Yes.
deliberate dumbing down the expectations of the children. No, let me go further forward and say this.
Yeah. Yeah.
The leadership said to me, well, you tell us what's going on, because they questioned me this night, this fete that my wife and I were thing. And they questioned me. We went to a fete. The fete mashed up because everybody wanted to talk what's going on in the schools. So we end up spending the night. They say, we have to do a paper. I say, look, my field is economics, development economics. I know nothing about education. I have no training in it. I've taught
Yes.
in America, but I have no training. That's not what I come here for. They say, well, anyhow, you're one of the very few black teachers in the schools now. You have no choice. You have to do it. There's London University School of Education. It's a library, 3-story building. Go and make yourself an expert. Go and tell us all that you have told us happening in the school system. Now go and find the research from around the world to confirm independently what you have observed and what you are saying. But that's the nature of the little book. So
Yes.
I go to the conference, I present, and the larger number of community organized leaders and say, you have to turn it into a book. You have to turn the paper and say, I made the same point. This is not my field. They say, make it your field. We're not interested. Make it your field. So I was recruited. What I'm saying is, this little booklet was not really written by me. I might have put pen on paper. I might have done the research in the library. And I may have had the experience in the schools that guided me in what research to look for. But it was really written by the community. It was really written by the West Indian leaders who were pressuring me to do what the community needed at that time.
Yes.
So I make that point. Right. And therefore, and that's an important point, because this thing is not about, it's about the Caribbean community and what they recruited me to do.
Yes.
I would never in wildest dreams have done this without their coming to me and saying, you have to do it. And this is why you have to do it. So I want to really stress that point. And it's important.
The book wrote itself through your hands.
Right.
The book wrote itself through the experience of the Caribbean people and the leadership and the vision of your colleagues around you. But you were just the conduit through which the book came.
All I was. That is all I was. And I want people to understand that. I didn't come here I didn't come to Britain with any intention of being some educationalist, write some book and all. I had no such stuff in my mind. I came to study development and go back home to build back home. So that's important going forward in terms of how we think about how we organize to transform our children's educational possibilities. But back to the So when I went into the London School of Education library, London University School, I was looking for material on self-image, on self-worth, on people feeling bad about themselves, on teacher expectations, on all the things I saw in the classes, in the schools. I wanted to see whether people can research on it. And I discovered that these two education psychologists, Rosenthal and Jacobson, in California, had done a study on it a few years before. I could find no other study like that anywhere else. I studied stuff from Germany, France, Australia, everywhere. That's the only study I could put my hands on. So I quoted it in my book. I outlined their position and I footnoted it so people could go and check the original for themselves. Here's the point. Here's the point. There's a professor, there's an assistant professor of the sociology of education. He's Jamaican by birth and schooling. He has a PhD from Cambridge University. He's now a professor of sociology of education at Brandeis University in America, which is the first university I went to as a young man. And he spent 3 years studying what is happening to West Indian or Caribbean origin. They weren't in the Windrush generation, they're the children and grandchildren of the Windrush generation. And he studied them in a secondary school in London. And he did exactly the same study of the same generation, a generation born this time in New York at a New York secondary school. Both of them very large secondary schools of similar size, similar ethnic composition, etc. But here the interesting thing. Because you might ask, well, what does that have to do with teacher expectation? It has everything to do with it. Because I
Yes.
observed this thing. And in fact, I actually wrote a paper, which I never published, about 15 years ago on that. Because I was based in America for 3 years and in Britain for 5. And I was making the comparison. I said to myself, what is going on here? Why are West Indian children or Caribbean children, Caribbean origin children, doing so much better in New York than in London, in America? Britain has puzzled by this. You know, they're immigrants, and immigrants everywhere, let's face it, throughout human history, regardless of ethnicity, immigrants tend to be people, generally speaking, with drive, with determination, with courage.
Drive. Yeah.
Move just from your home and go somewhere else. You're taking a risk,
Yes.
possibly even with life.
Yes.
You have to have special qualities about you to do that.
Yes.
Their
Yes.
children are doing very good, not what is happening in Britain. It should be the opposite. So therefore, why is it so much different in Britain and America? In specifically, for 3 years, was in London and New York. He discovered that overwhelmingly the teachers of all ethnicities, the teachers in New York, and by the way, his book is going to be published next year by Oxford University Press, and then his name is Professor Darren Wallace. So look out for it. It's going to be a major, because I've read a few parts of it, and it's something else. It's an ethnographic rather than a demographic study, but fascinating. And the point is that the teachers in New York, they have a culture of expectation of West Indian children, of Caribbean origin children, that they are excellent, that they learn quickly, that they can do better than anybody else. In other words, the opposite expectations are held by teachers in New York than held by teachers in London. The exact opposite. That's what he discovered. Now, it's a very complicated study, a very complex, sophisticated study by Professor Wallace. I mean, you know, it's not just about that, but I'm singling out that because for me, nothing is more important than that insight. That when he went into the school in New York, for example, he was amazed when was one Caribbean origin child who was kind of was kind of playing the fool in the class. And backwards. And he said to the teacher said to him, "Man, listen, what's wrong with you, man? You're from the West Indies, parents from the West Indies. If I tell them what you're doing, you know what will happen to you?" Again, I'm not quoting exactly, but the point is the teacher was threatening him with reporting him. No, that's more like what we know about in the Caribbean. Was threatening to his parents if he don't buckle up, because he is supposed to be superior. He is supposed to be among the best students because, listen to this, not because he personally is very bright, but because he's Caribbean. He's Caribbean origin.
Give him something to live up to. Yes. Yeah.
The teacher, so that the cultural expectations of New York teachers towards Caribbean origin children is the exact opposite. So that, right? And that says everything. Now, what Rosenthal and Jacobson, to go back to them now, and I'll show you the link.
Yeah.
They fooled the teachers in the school. That was part of the experiment, because they did the IQ test of all the children, and then they jumbled the results together. So children,
I know they
variety of academic levels or educational levels or intelligence levels, whatever you want to call it, the teachers were told wrongly that they are the high flyers. They are the brightest classes. And another group randomly assembled, including some of the ones that scored the highest in the IQ test, the teachers were told that the ones that are struggling. They are the slow learners. And surprise, surprise, at the end of the year, that's exactly what happened. The results, the academic performance of the children was exactly in expectation that the teachers had based on the false information that the education psychologists gave them as part of the experiment.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Absolutely, absolutely.
On the
so
part
when
of
you tell kids, man, listen, you're playing the fool, man, but you from the Caribbean, your parents from the Caribbean, you have to stop, cut it out, right?
Yes,
and
yes.
In London or in Birmingham or wherever are saying, oh, well, you know, black kids,
Yeah, I hear that, Bernard.
The lower stream, put them in an ABD, whatever, put them in a PRU, and so on.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you're taking self-fulfilling prophecies. That's what form
Yes.
expectation means.
Bernard, I want to address you as Bernard the Rebel now for the next question. Bernard the Rebel. You came here with a ethos and an approach to teaching and learning. And that approach included high expectations of your students, all your students, regardless race, color, class, gender. That marked you out to be a rebel in this system, right? Marked you out to something that is pure and good and worthy and honorable, makes you a rebel, made you a rebel in this system. You could have conformed, but rather than conforming, you sought to transform the broken system that you found. No. In the Caribbean, as you and I both agree, I think you and I are on the same page when we say we don't like corporal punishment. We don't agree with corporal punishment. But children, it was doled out to children in the Caribbean a particular period. And we can argue where that came from and enslavement and all of that. But the uniformity and the objectivity of corporal punishment probably gave some therapy to students because everybody was getting it for the same reasons. However, contrasting with the UK system, where you were abused, I'm going to use that word, where you were abused in the educational system, not based on any objective principle, but based on your race. So where a child, you talk to any person of a certain age in the Caribbean who had corporate, all of them almost without exception, unless it was really brutal, we'll talk about, well, it never harmed me, it made me better, whatever, right? Because there was a group therapy involved, that everybody got it, and so on, so on and so forth. But here, you would have a child knowing full well that the reason they were treated a particular way was because of their accent, their skin color, their background, and so on, which I would argue would lead to a sort of a mental health issue to be dealt with. But then, Bernard, we mustn't miss the jewel and the gem that we're talking about, which is the ethos and approach you and your colleagues across the board came with, and that is resident in much of our culture. This social capital you spend so much time talking about in your book. You point to the social capital that can be so powerful that we bring a social capital here. That's not just, it's good for our children from the West Indian background, Black students all over the world, but it's good for everybody. In other words, the social capital we are armed with and have is the comprehensive solution for education in the system, because our eyes are wide and broad and inclusive. Right? We include everybody in wanting everybody to do well. And I want to know how we ought to go about bottling, not even bottling. We don't want to capture the social capital. We want to disseminate it right across the society and let it infiltrate the very heart of the educational system and transform the way school works. And we know that this social capital comes from people who think like you, of which it's not in the majority in the school system, let's say. It is certainly not the ethos of the education, Department of Education. What I'm asking you is, how can we all play a role in enhancing this great value and social capital that we have, that we employ in our supplementary school, and unleash it in every hamlet and village and borough of this nation, so that all our children, regardless of race, gender, class, sexuality, religion, can be empowered by this form of awesome educational approach?
Yes, in fact, that is why I talk, and in the second half of the expanded edition of the booklet, of that the slogan and the cry and the mantra and the goal and the objective must be high quality education for all. Because the moment you try to do it in any other way, those who are masters of the three supremacies will use it to divide and rule the people at the bottom, the majority who are rigged into a system that is rigged for their failure. So that high quality education for all gets rid of that problem. And the truth of the matter is that you have to spend the resources in education if you want to get the results that you want to get in education. Now, the fact of the matter is that what our Caribbean parents did, because we've had some progress, not much, but the little progress we've had, notice why we had it. One, some of the Caribbean parents send their children back to the West Indies for the grandparents to look after them in the schools back in the region, in the Caribbean region. Others came with their children to do that, right? So that's one way some dealt with the problem. But resources and availability of the grandparents and so on back home limited that. Most people couldn't do that. But some Caribbean parents did that. And then they got their second education in the Caribbean and then went back for university and whatnot and to live in Britain thereafter. And that made a difference. They are part of those who have made it at the professional levels within Britain. Part of that. That's one solution. Others, what they did was they went to great lengths and sacrifices to send their children to private schools. As you know, very expensive. They found a way. In fact, I was telling some people recently of an incident that happened to me where this guy who was at the time 49 and quite famous in Britain, therefore I'm not calling names. He came to see me and he says, I'm 49 now, but of course I was a kid many years back and I had certain experiences and so on. And, you know, he was 49 then. I'm talking about something that happened about 10, 15 years ago, okay? And he says, your book came out and my mom read it and she came to the school and took me out of school the same day. School's still going on. She took me out of the school same day that she read the book.
Wow.
Put him straight in a private school. He says, and that formed his life possibilities. Now he's quite famous. She, I mean, at great sacrifice, his mom and dad both had to extra jobs. I mean, you can imagine the sacrifices to get in the private, but some did that. Yet others, when the Labour Party of that era decided to mash up this secondary modern for some, namely the white working class masses, and grammar schools for the few that they claim have the certain intellectual ability plus the middle class, and they said comprehensive schools for everybody. When they did that, a lot of the middle class moved house to be near the comprehensive that were top-notch, rather than the ones that weren't top-notch. A lot of middle class, white middle class did that, but some black parents did that too. Some, they found ways, they sold their property and they bought something close to, because recruitment into comprehensive schools, favoritism was given to if you come from the catchment area. There was no other system of favoritism. That was the main thing that got you a place in a comprehensive school that you wanted to go to. You had to be living within the areas, in the vast majority of. So they went to the trouble. So that's one way they made their sacrifice. So some made it by taking the people back to the Caribbean. Some made it by getting them into private schools at great expense. And some made it by changing their address and getting close to a comprehensive
address sometimes. Yes.
Then others did tutorials, a variety of methods. And what I'm saying is that there's a wide range of methods that can be used. Now, the key thing is that if we rally everybody to the position of everybody must have high quality education, this must not be the preserve of some people and not available for the majority of people. We want quality for everybody, and you campaign around. But in order to do that, now you have to have structures. You have to set up structures in order to achieve. You have to reach the parents. And one of my concrete proposals I'm rushing a bit because of time constraints. One of my proposals is to set up what I would call electronic parental advice and assistance bureaus, advice and assistance bureaus, ABs as I call it.
Yes.
And they don't have to have a physical location. You talk about physical location, you talk about the rent and all this kind of thing and utilities. We don't have this money. But COVID-19 has made all of humanity aware of what technology can do. Let's face it, Zoom and Skype and all of these things were around for quite a while, long before COVID-19.
Yes.
But we are now using them to a degree, never before. And I'm saying we have to harness technology. When we have our supplementary schools now, in addition to having several in different cities in Britain, there are many areas where we have Caribbean children and white working class children and children of other ethnicities that could benefit from these schools to transform their educational possibilities. There's no reason through the internet, through Zoom and other technologies of a similar kind, we cannot leverage the methodology for teaching children, right?
Very true, very true.
What they're getting in the school system, which is inadequate, which leaves out anything that would improve their self-image, which makes them feel bad about themselves, which is dumping them into dustbin streams and into tearing and setting and all kinds of methods to hold them back.
Yes.
We are now able to have supplementary schools and even alternative schools, right? In fact, are able to tap the best teachers we have, the best teachers of all ethnicities, our Black teachers and others who are proving themselves. And through the benefit of modern technology, they can be doing this. I want to tell you that I read an article 2 days ago of the BBC of what an Afghan woman who was a teacher in Afghanistan for many years and had to flee the country recently. And I think she's living in Turkey now. Some part of Europe, I think, is Turkey. And she has set up a school for thousands of girls who have been told they have to stay home. No more school for them. And so she has set up schools. So every household, every home now that have been reached are being reached from Turkey by this one teacher who has mobilized other teachers. So there are other Afghans and Iranians and people of various nationality, Turks and so on, who are all part of what you call an electronic teaching staff that are teaching girls in many schools and many households, homes. In other words, the homes have been turned into schools electronically. And that is what happened all the way from Europe into Afghanistan. Why can't we do that from London to Birmingham or Birmingham to London? In other words, wherever we have an outstanding geography teacher, history teacher, science teacher, maths teacher, whatever, and teacher in our history and culture, we practice all
and
of
on
this.
that, on that very point, Bernard, I'm just going to ask you to consider a question. While the team get together, we want to put out a survey for our listeners and this evening to respond to a few questions that would help us with this knowledge. So I'm going to invite that that question to be delivered shortly. But Bernard, on that last point, and then I'm going to invite the team to come in to deliver the survey point. You mentioned that one of the things parents did was to take their children back to the Caribbean. And that was a very privileged thing to do because you needed the money to do that, to take a child, to be educated there and so on, right? In our era, as you're just talking about this electronic age and the advice, the advice and center that you're mentioning in the alternative schools, can we not take the Caribbean here? If we can't go there, identify schools of excellence, schools that you want to tune into the classroom, direct, log on, and not just in the Caribbean, but anywhere in the world, in Africa, we're excellent models of education, where we can learn cultures all over the place, that we might want to consider some of those models electronically, where we can do this. And also, if you want to add to that, whilst the survey is being prepared, and I'll find out how it's going to be delivered, can you also respond to the point of, You and I, we both work in education. I think we both agree that the fact that we value every learner in front of us, and that our lectures and our delivery change semester from semester. Why? Because we learn from the students sitting in front of us. Although we are delivering the lecture or the class, we sit at the feet of the students. We learn from them. We absorb their experience and knowledge and expertise, and it strengthens our subject. So I wondered if you would say something about approaches that we can have that value each student individually and the whole class collectively.
Right.
And I'm going to mute, and while you respond to that and send the survey around.
Important. I say, first of all, we have now the technology that makes it possible for the world to be our school. We need to harness it. We need to move in that direction. We need to leverage modern technology to transform the education of all our children who are presently kept in a rigged to fail system. So that let me just read a few points, if you don't mind. A dozen points.
Absolutely. Please, Bernard.
12 points which I made to an annual general meeting in July gone of educational psychologists and trainee educational psychologists, black and brown educational psychologists. In my day, 50 years ago, there was one in the whole country that I heard about, that I knew about. One. Today, I don't know, at that conference, there might have been 80 or 100.
Yes.
So you see what has happened there. So the potential is there. Now we have to harness it. We have to do what those Caribbean parents did and those Caribbean activists and leaders did in grabbing me and grabbing others. We have to do this with all our talented people, all our people who have, in fact, been able to achieve even against the odds and bring them into the process. But here are the 12 points. What I have learned from my experience as a teacher in 7 countries, in Britain, United States, and 5 countries in the Caribbean. 1, every single child, without exception, is capable of learning vastly more than all of us who teach can usually imagine. 2, children and adults too are limited only by the limitations of the teachers' imagination, limited by the teachers' imagination, B, knowledge, C, skill set, skill in imparting the knowledge, and D, skill in motivating the child. We are the ones that are limited, not the child. The child is unlimited in terms of learning potential, in my experience. The limitations come from any lack of imagination on our part, lack of knowledge on our part, lack of skills in imparting the knowledge on our part, and lack of skill and effort in motivating the child. Just think of the extraordinary amount that animals have been able to learn, that animals have been able to be taught. This should be a wake-up call for all teachers and parents, that each child's boundless capacity to learn can be and should be engaged in, motivated, inspired, and taught creatively. Secondly, well, that was the second point. Right? The first was every single child without exception is capable of incredibly more than we imagine. The third point, misbehavior by a child, any child and every child. Misbehavior, a child who acts out, is a cry for help. Listen to this.
Yes.
All of those that are excluding children and all this foolishness. When you exclude a child, you have failed, not the child. Let's be clear. You have failed. You are a failure, not the child. Misbehavior by a child, any child, every child who acts out is a cry for help, not to be seen as a crime to be punished. A child's misbehavior should be seen as a challenge to the teacher to better understand the child and his or her circumstances and needs. I repeat, misbehavior is a cry for help. Point 4. exclusion must therefore be seen as a failure of the teacher, of the principal, and of the school as a whole, and of the teachers' college or colleges that produce those teachers, who produce or train teachers inappropriately, and or of someone who should not be in the teaching profession at all. They either selected some people that should not have been in it, or they selected people with the potential and the capacity, but didn't train them properly. 5, every child has, figuratively speaking, a light bulb in the mind, a light bulb. The challenge of every teacher is to locate the switch, which is differently located in each child, and turn it on. That is the job of the teacher. Oh, Lord, I get it now.
Yes.
You know, Eureka moment.
Figure it out. Right? Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Now, 6 points. The death, quote unquote, death of each child's potential.
Yeah.
Each motivation to learn. Each child's chances of lighting up that bulb inside him or her is low teacher expectations regarding that child. 7.
So true.
No matter how truly dreadful a child's home and neighborhood environment, overcrowded home, no books, no library at home, no quiet corner in the room to do housework, alcohol or drug abuse by some in the home, domestic violence, and neighborhood riven with gangs, police harassment, and so on. No matter all of those circumstances, one gifted teacher, just one, can often transform the learning and life potentialities and possibilities of a child. How many successful people in this world we know who say, man, I came from the most unbelievably disadvantageous circumstances. And most of my weren't worth a nickel. But there was this one teacher who lighted up my desire to read, who inspired me, who opened up the world to me, and I never looked back. One teacher, one teacher trumped all of that. Because let's face it, you ain't gonna get no government that gonna fix the housing problems and fix this problem and all the different problems. But if you do something about the teaching, right, then in that school environment, you can light up the children, you can motivate them, you can transform them, you can literally turn on that light bulb that each child has, so that the potential transformation is there if you have the right teachers and properly trained. One gifted teacher, just one, can often transform the learning and life possibilities of a child, and so on. Number 8 of 12 points, so we almost finished. Tests and testing are very dangerous. They can and often do destroy possibilities. They tend to place limitations and wrongful expectations instead of inspiring growth and development. It's like the difference between taking a snapshot and a video.
Video is a better one.
Tests tend to pigeonhole children to assess, usually wrongly, for numerous reasons wrongly, what or how much a child can learn and how quickly. No test can do that. Tests can often serve whatever their intentions to limit children.
Yes.
To teacher expectations of children in stone and too low. Jacobson and Rosenthal study. To place limits on children, not to illuminate where and how each child can be lit up.
Yes.
They tend to close horizons, not illuminate where the light bulb switch is located, to take the child from where he or she is at the moment to much higher heights. I want to remind people that Winston Churchill was struggling with reading and writing at age 10 and 11. Winston Churchill went on, not just to be Prime Minister of Britain, more importantly, in some respects, he won the Nobel Prize, not for peace, not for defeating Nazi Germany. Winston Churchill, most people think is that. Winston Churchill won the Nobel Prize in literature. He wrote 26 volumes, many of which I read, and they are outstanding. And this is a guy who at age 11 was struggling with reading and writing. He could have been written off. He could have been put if he was black in an ESN school, but no more on that. They tend in practice to close horizons, test to, not illuminate where the light bulb switch is located to take children from where he or she is at the moment to much higher heights. Number 9, it is vital that education psychologists recognize that the objective, quote unquote, assessment devices that they use say more about the persons who devise these tests than about the children about on whom they are being used and misused.
Yeah, absolutely.
10, if a teacher does not understand, A, understand, B, respect the identity, the history, and the culture of a child, then 2 things follow. Little one, the child will pick this up, usually subconsciously, but very quickly. I repeat, that does not understand, A, and B, respect the identity, history, and culture of a child. And that's true for the curriculum too, not just the teacher.
Yes, true.
The child pick this up, usually subconsciously, very quickly. At a very early age. When they're older, they pick it up consciously.
Very perceptive, very perceptive.
Very early.
Yeah.
And 2, most children will be demotivated by this reality.
True.
Unless they're conscious parents and supplementary schools like the one that Akala went to. And many of
yes,
failing by the teacher, the school, the curriculum, the education system, unless it is rectified. Number 11, every human being, including therefore every teacher, have prejudices that they are often, usually not even aware of. Persons whose entire lives have been affected by class, religion, racial, nationality, gender, or other discriminations have built-in radar. In other words, children have built-in radar. They pick this up about their teacher in a flash. Yes. You know that?
Absolutely. 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 Their sense of perception is highly developed.
Properly, but they have radar. The radar working perfect.
Yes. Yes.
So you ain't fooling nobody is the point I'm making.
Yes.
You ain't fooling nobody.
Yeah.
The final point, 12. To be a really effective teacher, therefore, you need to be aware of all your unconscious biases so that conscious steps to remedy them. And I have 6 points to the teachers. I say, teachers, beware of your prejudices, of your stereotypes. Beware of them. And keep reminding yourself regularly, not once and then you forget it. Regularly remind yourself. You get up every morning and you stretch. Remind yourself that you are a product through socialization of certain prejudice and stereotypes. I'm going to fight it today. It's not going to happen to me today. B, take corrective measures. C, develop a plan for each child. You're not educating a classroom. You're educating each individual child in your class. The child's progress regularly and adjust accordingly. If you haven't found that light, ask yourself, well, I try over here, I try over here. Let me try another location, but I have to find that child's light bulb because I have to find every child in my class their light bulb.
Yes.
Take ownership for each child's progress or lack thereof under your tutelage. You take progress. Don't tell me the child dunce, the child hard to hear, the child giving problems, the child misbehaving, the parents not doing this and that for the child, and that is what holding the child back. Stop all these excuses. You have to succeed. I have a position. Any child, any student I teach, and I do this even at university teaching level, any student who fails my course, I fail, not them. It's my job to find a way to communicate the information such that, aha, I got it.
Yes.
Keep searching. Find the switch. Find the light bulb in each child's mind. And finally, to the various ways a child calls out for help, including misbehavior. Some withdraw into themselves and say a word. The opposite of misbehavior, but sometimes it's caused by the same thing.
Same thing. Same thing. Same thing.
So these are the points I try to make to the educational psychologists at the annual general meeting. And it's important for teachers, and it's important for parents to know all of this too, because
Yes,
they can hold it accountable. They can hold the schools accountable.
yes. I can hear the scribblings of pens all over this webinar of people jotting down your points. And if they didn't manage to do so, this event is being recorded today and all your valuable points can be taken on board. And you're really reminding us of the children and their sense of perception. If a teacher has a low expectation and negative attitudes to the child, it cannot be hidden. And likewise, if they have a positive approach and high expectation, it will set the child in the right rhythm. So Bernard, we're going to take a short pause. We're going to come right back to us. I'm going to invite Fran to come back on to know 50 years from your book. We want to ask a few questions of the 3 short questions, multiple choice questions in terms of your experience in the education system. Whilst at the same time, Bernard, I'm going to ask you to drop, people have been asking about your book. And please drop and if anybody has it, please drop where people can get your book. A lot of people want that book and they want to know where they can get it. I've got my very precious copy, which will, be circulated, but more copies need to be bought on this. So please, if anybody has the link to Bernard's book, please let's drop it in whilst we now move to Fran, who is going to take us through the survey, short survey, before we go back to Bernard for reflecting on some of the questions we've been hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you, Bernard, for your contribution to date. It's been absolutely fascinating. There is now a short survey which should be coming up on your screens, and I will read it through as soon as I can see it there. Just waiting for it to be loaded, I think. Thank you. Just to say that your answers will be anonymous, so no one will be able to tell where they've come from, and they won't be reported as coming from any individual. And I'll just read through them quickly. The first question is around your gender, whether you're male, female, or non-binary. Then a question concerning your education. The question is, what was your experience in relation to your school making the most of your potential during compulsory education? So you've heard quite a lot about potential during the past hour, and I think what we're trying to establish is what you thought happened in your school with regard to your potential. Was it excellent, good, satisfactory, unsatisfactory, or did you actually consider that your compulsory school education made such poor use of your potential that it was damaging to your future? Then we want to know whereabouts you lived during the majority of your education, running through England and Wales, so London and the southeast, the Midlands, the northwest, the northeast, the southwest, or Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland, or were you actually educated outside the United Kingdom, which is other? Then we'd like to know whether or not you're of West Indian or West Indian heritage. You can just answer yes or no. And finally, the final question is, in which decade did you primarily undertake your education, running right through from the 1950s to the present date, the 50s, the 60s, the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, or was it in this century, the first decade of the century, or from 2011 to date? And those are our poll questions. I hope you'll have the opportunity to answer them all. Towards the end of the session, we will come back with some answers, which we hope, there have been around about 180 people attending online. We hope will give us some impressions of your compulsory school education. So thank you for that. I'm now going to hand back to Dave and Bernard to continue with the Q&A.
Thank you, Fran. And we will now resume our discussion. I can tell you all, audience, that you will get the results of this survey before we close the program tonight. I can also tell you that, like the epic film 1970s Jaws, which was a threat to that community, the educational system is similar. They needed a bigger boat. We need more time. Bernard, your contribution so far and in your entire career has been absolutely brilliant and amazing. We really want you back on screen, Bernard, and I hope you can hear us. Though far, we feel you're close. And among all the contributions we have over the years, we value you among the most. So whilst we're waiting for Bernard, you can see, audience, that based on the conversation, we're just really scratching the surface. Bernard has a whole raft of recommendations of how we go forward. Chief among them, schools of inclusion, as he's been talking about. And I know that there have been a lot of efforts by a lot of people in our community to set up schools. We know that there has been a huge success in terms of the supplementary and alternative education we have in this country. We know that homeschooling has been a great success, and we know the challenges associated with that, where parents and carers have chosen to educate their children at home rather than expose them to the vicissitudes and the deleterious practices that often occur in schools. So in many ways, we need to continue on this sort of great tradition and continue to build on it. I know it's very close to Bernard's heart. The culture of parenting and how we parent and how we can support parents. And I do know that most of us have been the beneficiaries of that African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. I know that. Well, all of you here online, you're part of this village. And if you thought that you were mere recipients of an education system that maybe has not benefited us, we are now in the position where we can contribute to the education of those around us, our own children, but not just our own children, the children in society, the children we come across, those who you know the name and those who you don't know. Bernard reminded us tonight that one teacher can change the outcome of a child. One person. I want us all to consider ourselves as teachers today, whatever your expertise may be, whatever your influence may be, whatever your privileges may be, your contacts, your connections. Bernard, you're back. Thank you so much. Whatever your contacts and your connections may be, use them to the glory of our children, the support and building of our children. Bernard, thank you for coming back, Bernard. If you will unmute for a moment, Bernard, and further to this meeting, we will be we will be making available the recording so people can go through, listen again, make notes, and implement some of the strategies. Bernard, thanks for coming back. You talked about an alternative schooling system. I'm just kind of consolidating what I could gather from some of the questions that have been promulgated in the Q&A, and just kind of putting everything together for like a closing now, because we had 90 minutes for this. We need more time. We need other occasions where we continue to talk about this subject. If we're going to actually continue to make progress, and let's not think we're starting now. The efforts have long been started in terms of creating everything you're talking about, Bernard, from alternative school and education to parenting and the community role. Very importantly, the social capital you talked about. You mentioned this advice and assistance bureaus that you think are important for parents and carers. I wonder if you would close on 50 years onward now. What are the new directions that we need to be looking at going on? What are the new things we need to be considering? Going forward now, how should we be working together as individuals and organizations committed to maximizing the potential of our young people to connect together, work together, and move forward and go forward? Just over to you, Bernard. Thank you so much.
It has many parts to it. Let me say, first of all, that I identify in my own mind 4 critical areas to the learning stroke teaching process. Or you might want to call it the teaching learning process, but I like to put learning first. 1, tackling self-worth, self-belief, self-confidence, that aspect, inner sense of inner security, identity, those issues, they're all interlinked. That is the number 1 priority in my view in the teaching process. Because if a child, for that matter, an adult, does not believe in himself or herself, does not have confidence, does not see themselves as of value, you ain't going anywhere. Forget about motivation, forget about academic achievement, forget about life prospects. That's the starting point. Not maths, not English, not science, but self-worth, self-belief, self-confidence, inner security. A belief that when you encounter difficulties, I haven't got a clue how to solve it, but I'm confident I will find a way. That's your attitude. Number 2, tackling the emotional, psychological, personal issues and challenges, distracting the child from absorbing what he is taught, what he or she is taught. This is vital. I know this from teaching. I know this especially teaching for 20 years in the prison in Grenada. That in fact, you're talking about kids who have been unbelievably abused physically and emotionally. They are wrecks. They have been on the street from 10, 11, 12 years of age. Education is the last thing they know anything about. And if you are able to identify and to tackle, to address emotional, stroke, psychological, personal issues, challenges, that child can make, or now that young adult can make enormous progress. But if you don't address that, that is like you trying to roll a stone up a hill and there's a rope tied around your waist and 20 people pulling you down the hill. It can't work. So that's number 2. Notice I ain't talking about English and maths yet, or history, exactly, or biology, or chemistry, or physics. That comes third. The subject matters, pedagogy, the technique, the right technique for teaching math, for teaching English, for teaching this, that, and the other. The right teaching technique. Too many teachers, colleges focus only on that, or mostly on that. That's a mistake. Number 1 and 2 must come first. Number 3 only comes after number 1 and 2. And then the 4th and final point, but in many respects the most important, the most ambitious, finding and turning on the light switch in each child. Finding the location of each child's light switch and getting that light switch turned on. So that you're not just teaching maths in a vacuum, teaching English in a vacuum, teaching physics, chemistry, whatever in a vacuum. But you have to find the light switch. And the child is now gripped. You can't turn them back now. They want to read on their own. They want to go and use the library on their own. They want to use Google and find out everything they can about this, that, and the other, because you have turned on the light switch. So those are the 4 things. Tackling self-worth, self-belief. Addressing the emotional, psychological, personal issues, challenges, distractions that the child is facing. 3, the actual subject matters. Proper pedagogy in teaching them. And 4, find the light switch. And it's a different location in each house. The house in this case being each child. So that's the one thing. Second thing I want to, in broad answer to your question, I've written out 6 objectives of every supplementary school. And I want to suggest it to be not only for supplementary schools, but for parents who decide on homeschooling, for parents who decide on a mixture of homeschooling and supplementary schools, for those who decide on transforming the internet and technology into supplementary schools and homeschooling and full-time schooling that can be taking place every day of the week, of the school week, so that you no longer need the state schools at all. In other words, there are different models. You can use the state schools, you can use private schools, you can do homeschooling, you can do a mixture of different things. And I'm saying modern technology makes it possible for us to put together the right mix for each particular parent and each particular child. And these are the 6 objectives. 1, and there's overlap with what I did, the 4 points I just made, but I'm putting them in a different way now. 1, a strong sense of identity, of history, of cultural heritage, of building self-confidence, self-belief, and a sense of self-worth. That's objective number 1 of every supplementary school, every alternative school. And by the way, that applies to the white working class. It applies to brown and black kids. Every single kid needs to be confident, needs to have a sense of self-worth, needs to have self-belief. Everybody this applies to. 2, strongly develop self-control, A, self-control, and B, critical thinking skills. Now, some will put it as 2 separate points, but I put them together as A and B. Strongly developed. That was part of your job. The curriculum and the teaching methods you use must be aimed at developing in each child self-control, A, and B, critical thinking skills. We are not preparing robots. And we are not preparing people for menial jobs. We want to move into the knowledge economy where everybody is going to be contributing at a high intellectual level. That's what the knowledge economy. We are moving to the post-industrial, not post-industrial financial stuff, post-industrial knowledge intensive industry. And that requires body to be highly educated. That's the one time you can say, yes, we can justify spending many more billions of dollars in education because we need everybody to be operating at a high level. We're done with menial work. Robots can do that. Machines can do that.
Yes.
We want everybody to be engaged at high levels of the knowledge industry. No time, because if I had time, I'd develop that and give you some concrete examples. 3, a wide range of marketable skills. These I'm saying are the goals of supplementary schools, but also of alternative schooling in general. A wide range of marketable skills, starting with A, the core skills, your maths, your English, and so on, the core skills. And B, the building on these in several directions. Because, you know, there are so many areas, so many careers that one can now get into that is high value added, high income earning, that people can make a really important contribution, feel that they are of worth, and make good income at the same time. So that we want to give the core skills, A, and B, build on those in several directions, depending on the particular interests that each child shows. 4, an entrepreneurial outlook, training in spotting and seizing opportunities. You want to train every child in how to spot and seize up. Not just spot them, oh Lord, boy, if only people did this. No, not people. You go and do it. You spot it, now do it. So you want to train them both in spotting opportunities and in seizing them. Number 5, helping to build social capital amongst one's own age group or generation and in the community in general. Building social capital. This is so vital because that's the glue. Social capital is people helping each other, people coming together with the same values, the same objectives, the same broad goals, recognizing that we live not as individual islands, but we're part of a commonality. We're part of a civilization, that we have common objectives and values. And when we help each other without material reward, we can make enormous progress, right? And so, again, if we had time, I could give you 1,000 examples that would really ram home just how important this is. Number 6 and final, in terms of the broad goals, leveraging the lessons of COVID-19 and the technology used during the pandemic. We've been saying this all night, but I put it now as a 6th point. To reach vastly more children who I need electronically. Video the teaching of the best teachers in every existing supplementary school for use in the others. And for children in areas without supplementary schools, use this in turn to get more schools, in-person schools started, as well as more involved in the electronic schools. The point here is, by videoing all of the most excellent lectures by teachers in every of the fields we talk about, it means not only do they have to listen to it live, but by recording it, by videoing it, it means that at the time most convenient for the child and his or her parents, they can review it, they can look at it, including look at it 2 or 3 times until their light bulb goes on. The fact of the matter is, the best teaching in every subject area, wherever it takes place, anywhere, we capture it on video and we make it available for everyone. That is where schooling is going. We have to move with the times. COVID-19 has killed many people, millions of people, hospitalized many others. It's a terrible thing, but it has also pointed us in directions that can be harnessed in a positive way. And this is one. We can transform the educational opportunities of all our children if we're serious about this, right? So I would say that. Now, one final point, coming back to the parents and the question of advice and assistance bureaus, which I say, you don't have to have a location because that means rent and public utilities and all that. Instead, you have it electronically and you have a team of 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 volunteers. Listen, you're asking them to give 1 hour a week or 2 hours a week at the most to be by the phone or to be next to particular social media or whatever means the parents use. I need help. I having a problem with my school or with my local education authority. I need to help with drafting a letter that is appropriate to the particular complaint I have. I need help with a lawyer to take this matter further in court because I'm not getting anywhere with the letters. I need help to reach somebody or more than one person on the school board to engage them in problems my child or my children are having. In other words, there's a range of different levels: the individual teacher, the principal, the school board, the local education authority, and so on, the court system, so that people need different kinds of help. So they get phone calls. So you have people who are available. Now, let me just tell you an experience I have finally, because I know we're running out of time. I ran youth clubs in Southeast London many years ago, right? Back in 67, 68. And they could only afford to pay one youth leader. There was a foundation that was running this thing, a non-profit foundation. Big 6-story Victorian building with lots and lots of big rooms available. 500 kids in the neighborhood, in and out of trouble with the police all the time, in and out of bar-style children's homes, you name it. Desperate for somewhere to go. And there was only one club functioning, the Monday Club, for 6 to 9-year-old children, 20 of them, 5 to 7 p.m. Now, that's ridiculous in a whole town. right? To have one club for 69-year-old boys and girls, 20 kids. That's it. And you need for 500 kids. By the way, they were all white working class at that time. There was not a single black child living in that area at that time. Okay, so you can imagine the kind of reception I got when I first went there. I won't go into that now. Now, here's the point. I by myself can't possibly run this thing. So I say, you know what I have to do? I need adult volunteers. So I got cards, and I'm saying we can use a similar approach, creatively adapted to the modern technology where we have social media, we have other methods. We don't have to use these cards that I had to use back then. But we're talking 50+ years ago. I got these cards and put them up in every teacher's college, in every private sector organization, every department of government, every place, every workplace I could, where professionals worked. People with university degrees, young people in their 20s and 30s and 40s with university degrees and with professional qualifications worked. And the card said the same to all of them. I need 2 hours of your time once a week. I know you're very busy people. You're professionals. You have 1,000 things on your plate, plus you have your private life. But if you give me 2 hours, one evening a week, you could help to transform the life potential and opportunities and possibilities of lots of poor white working class children who are in desperate need of help. No, there are lots of people I can tell you in every country, including America. I mean, we talk about social capital, something I can give you examples. America is a country with probably the most social capital in the world. You know, this might sound crazy, right? Because you think of it as the mightiest military and technological, etc., power in the world. But America also has the most social capital. It's unbelievable. I could give you concrete examples of that, but that's another story. The important point here is I got 125 volunteers, which I needed. 25 per night. And when you have 25 adults that the kids can look up to, they see a different, these are kids who had never been to the Tower of London, one bus ride away. They'd never been to the Tower of London, they'd never been to the House of Parliament. They'd never seen, they had never seen London, they'd never seen Leicester Square, Piccadilly Square. They were one bus ride away, and they hadn't seen these places. And so these people came into their lives, and both were transformed by it. Both the professionals who came in and these kids were transformed by the experience, the interaction. 2 hours once a night. But that meant all my nights, Monday to Friday, were fully booked with enough adults so that the adult to child ratio was fantastic. And we had clubs for sewing, we had clubs for making bread, clubs for cooking meals, clubs for making lamps, using these fabulous wine bottles as the base. And we got electrical stuff. We had clubs making clothes, men's and boys and girls clothes. We had clubs making different plates and cups and so on, pottery and so on. We had 15 different clubs doing different things, boys and girls taking part in this, and it was tremendous because when they made bicycles from old parts and thrown away parts, they took the bicycle home. When they made lamps, they took the lamps home, and if they had too many, they sold what they didn't need. They took the bread home. They took everything. And I went to the businesses and I say, hey, are you giving us a few pounds of flour and butter and baking oil? This is the difference you can make in many people's lives. So I went to many businesses and I mobilized. This is one of the important lessons. Communities have more resources than we think, human and material. We have to know how to tap the community. People want to feel that they can offer something meaningful. They don't have time to waste. They don't have time to waste. But if for a limited amount of their resources or a limited amount of their time or both, they can see a big difference being made in the circumstances of people in need, they say, count me in. I sign up for that. I'm saying we can staff with hundreds, if not thousands of people, those advice and assistance bureaus that I'm talking about that can give parents throughout Britain advice when they're having difficulties in the school that children are going to, with the teacher, with the principal, with the local education authority, with the school board, at whatever level, whatever issue that they want to engage, they can ring or they can text or they can email particular addresses, numbers, whatever it is that is provided, and there will be somebody at the other end of the quote-unquote line. As we know in modern technology, it may not be a line, but you know what I mean. And
Yes.
there's somebody there. They might be only giving 1 hour a week, but you have enough people so that every hour of the week is covered. And in that way, we can transform the potential for parents to be empowered, to have a means of redress, to have a means of somebody or bodies coming to their help in addressing the needs. So we must identify what are the objectives. I try to give some. What are the objectives of the process? How do we get the ball rolling? How do we tap the talent that we need for it without taking up all of these talented people's times? They don't have a lot of time, but they have enormous experience. And how do we get everybody a quality education? That's why I made those 4 points about the teaching and learning process, the self-worth and self-confidence point, and the other points, the 4 points, and the 6 goals of the school system and so on. So let's put this together. Let's start doing it. Let's start transforming. And as we go along, we're going to discover we made mistakes. We should have done this way. We should have done that way.
We'll learn from them.
Right.
Yes.
It's called trial and error. In mathematics, it's called iterative method.
Yes.
So that's what we do. And this is just my humble suggestion for where we go from here.
Bernard, my brother, my colleague, my friend, my comrade, your contributions with us this evening, really, they have been beautiful and valued and valuable. It looked like we're going to have to close, but there will be other moments and other times. I think there's a need for it. We do have the results of the poll here, and I'll just read them out. Well, the majority of the audience, female, a vast majority, 81%. The combination between satisfactory, unsatisfactory, and damaging in your answers outweigh the good and the excellent. So that's an area to be looked at. London and the Southeast is by far represented, majority of the people here tonight. We'll actually be publishing these as well. And 73% of the audience of people who answered was from the West Indies. Majority of the education took place in the 1970s, 38% of us online, 1980s followed the 1990s. The results of this will be posted to the group. Bernard, I mean, really and truly, in this system here, it's absolutely certain you can go to the school system here and get an education and come out and do well. But for the majority of people, as you put it, it doesn't work. For many people, it acts as a production line for prison. And you reminded us tonight that you transformed a prison such that those there could receive great education and move on to achieve their potential, from prison to potential, to contributing to the public good. You've done that. And in a way, the videos you were talking about, the videos of excellence, I want to invite you to be a participant in one of those videos. And many of us online here can also participate to do that. You've also multiplied your genius, in your generosity of spirit and your kindness. You've multiplied yourself and your genius into so many of us, so many others of us, and we should do likewise. Use our privileges and our connections to multiply our benefits and goods and blessings and all these things that we have and our possessions. We need to multiply that out in the community. I'm going to invite now Chanel, our wonderful and talented and inspiring apprentices, legal apprentices, Chanel and Malik, to close the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Bernard, once again. You know, Malik and I were just discussing throughout listening into the interview how insightful the interview was and how much we've taken from it, and how so much of it resonated with our own experiences growing up in the UK, I think. And it's interesting how 50 years on since the book has been written, that a lot of the experiences and the attitudes towards Black West Indian children here, growing up here, born here, is still resonates with us today, and it's still experiencing it in different ways. And I think what both Malik and I were focusing on were the different recommendations of what we can do to try and help revolutionize the education system and to change that. And just a few notes before we do close this today. For me, myself, I'm a young parent, and I've always thought that I do think the onus is also on the parent or parents to try and get involved as much as we can in the education of our children, both internally within the schools and externally in the extracurriculum activities that we do. And for me, making sure that my son's reading catalogue is reflective of his heritage, of who he is as a young Black boy, his West Indian background, from both sides, having authors of West Indian descent, who are West Indian, poets. We have, little books of catalogue of different little poems and affirmations and things for him to read and look to. And I also think that, I think a lot more of us need to engage and get with, be a part of the education system. We need to have more faces there that are reflective of us. And that's something that I've always made a conscious effort with my son, seeing as he's at nursery, and making sure that he does see authoritative figures that look like him, that speak like him, that, will encourage, him and understand him. So I think we do need more of that in place. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts, Malik?
Yeah, I think it's up to the future of West Indian children to take initiative when it comes to these decisions. Educating our future children about our culture. I'm fortunate enough, my parents have been able to take me to Jamaica numerous times, to where my family are from, Port Antonio, to learn about my history and so on. And I feel like those experiences really give you that cultural feeling, and they make you want to work harder and so on. And with this apprenticeship with Leigh, we've been able to further our education, and not everyone gets to have this experience, and we're really appreciative for this and so on. So those experiences that we had at young ages through education, we've been able to use what we've learned through our parents and our culture and so on to further that. So we are really appreciative and so on.
Yeah, thanks, Malik. So I feel like on that note, it was such a beautiful discussion, and it just brought back a lot of memories, bittersweet. And I think moving on, thank you everybody who attended today's webinar. A big shout out and thank you to Dave, Neita, Francis Swain, and of course the incredible Bernard Coard. So thank you so much. Thank you. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you all.
Take care.